Hey, we're here with Blake Rudis, who's going to tell us about his classes at the Photoshop Virtual Summit this time around. So, welcome, Blake. Thanks for taking time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. So, one of the classes you're doing is a relatively new feature in the RAW side, which is the new masking features in the RAW side of things. So, tell us a little bit about the idea behind that class.
Yeah, so at this point, it is relatively new, but at the same time, there's also a lot of content out there. I know I've done several videos on YouTube about it, and several other instructors that are probably here have done videos on the masking in the Adobe Camera Raw. And so, what I'm kind of focusing on is not necessarily that basic stuff because we've all kind of been through that. I'm focusing on some of the more advanced things that you can do with the new masking. And one of the things that I'm really focusing on is the math behind it. I know we don't have, algebra in there with X's and Y's, but it can kind of feel like that sometimes. So I'll be covering things like adding and subtracting and intersecting the masks. And then I'll take it a step above and even show how to make presets from the masks. Not necessarily local adjustment presets because those are kind of garbage in there. No offense, Adobe, but actually making a good solid preset that you can use over and over and over again on multiple types of images. I think that the users will find a lot of serious potential with that, and I've also included
Nice.
some presets for that as well. So
Awesome. Now, this is you're doing using Camera Raw, but if someone uses Lightroom, can they apply the same theory to what you're showing?
absolutely. So, the engines are relatively the same, if not exactly the same. So anything that someone would see in Adobe Camera Raw that I do in either of my courses, they can kind of transpose that same idea over into Lightroom if they happen to be a Lightroom user.
So, what of the things you're showing in that raw massing class, what would you say is the thing that excited you the most as you were kind of going through and recording that you thought people would be really psyched to see?
I think a lot of the inverse operations is really what excites me. In almost all the editing that I do, I think of every single thing that I do as two different options. So even if that's a mask in Photoshop, there's something on the other side. It's kind of like the Stranger Things. Like sometimes the stuff that's on the other side can be bad stuff, but there's at least some other data there. So if you invert a mask or you flip a mask, there's a nice surprise that's on the opposite side sometimes. So I think a lot of times we get like stuck like this, where like I selected the subject.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then you have this select subject box. But then if you duplicate that and inverse that selection, you get select background, even though there is no select background.
Sure.
That's a way that you can kind of get select background. Or in the idea of select sky, we think about the sky, but do we think about the inverse, which is select foreground? So there's a lot of flip side stuff that's going to happen in that presentation. And I think it's going to just click and it's going to, I think that there's not one person that's going to go through that and not think to themselves, okay, for every mask I make, I've got two options, and they're going to see that flip side. So that's
Perfect.
what excites me the most. And especially like when you do invert it and then you do something like, whoa, okay, that's exactly what I wanted,
Yeah. I
even though
love
you
it.
didn't
I
know
love
you
that
needed it.
feeling. I love
Yeah,
that feeling of when something you do something and think, "Oh, perfect. That's exactly what I need," and that's a much easier way to get there. So that's awesome.
exactly.
Now, speaking of getting there, your other class is on workflow, and in the title of the class, it includes one of my favorite words in Photoshop, which is smart. So tell us about the smart workflow concept.
So, I mean, I teach workflow pretty extensively in my little court of Photoshop discussion, and this is a much different take on workflow that I'm used to. It was kind of a rabbit hole thing. I started this concept of developing a smart workflow. What does that look like? What does it look like to do something smarter? And one of the things that comes up a lot is when I do something in Adobe Camera Raw, inadvertently someone will email me and then say something to the effect of, well, I tried what you did in Adobe Camera Raw and it looks like garbage. And I'm like, well, are you using Adobe Camera Raw, the program, on a raw file, or did you take a raw file, bring it into Photoshop and use Adobe
Mm,
Camera Raw, the filter? And they're like, well, I used the filter. I'm like, okay, hold on a second. We need to talk about this. We need to break this down and talk about Adobe Camera Raw, the program, and Adobe Camera Raw, the filter. So that kind of got me on this idea of smart workflows. And then as I was creating the content, one of the things I wanted to show was culling smartly, and how I cull with a 1 star through 4 star process. And in the process of doing that, I saw that Adobe added a new workflow section inside Bridge, which actually helped me out an incredible amount when it comes to saving my PSD files as JPEGs. So I'm going to be talking about that workflow side of things. So I'm going to be talking about the beginning of the workflow, which is culling and looking at bridge, which for other people who might use Lightroom, they can take the culling aspect of things and use that for Lightroom. It's just a smart way that I cull my photographs so that I don't accidentally delete things I don't want to. And then I'm going to kind of close it out in Bridge with some workflow stuff. And then I'm going to jump into Adobe Camera Raw and teach some smart things about Adobe Camera Raw. And what those would be were like, again, like I said, understanding the difference between Adobe Camera Raw, the filter, and Adobe Camera Raw, the program. And for those who might not know this, they are very different. You're editing raw data in the program, Adobe Camera Raw, when you open up a raw file into there. But then when you're using Adobe Camera Raw, the filter, you're kind of working on like a either 8 or 16-bit intermediary file, depending on what you select. So there I show making sure you set your raw files to open up in Adobe or in Photoshop with 16-bit. And then we'll take an even deeper dive into the workflow aspect of stuff in Adobe Camera Raw. This one's really critical. There's something in there. I started thinking about how an image is edited in Adobe Camera Raw in terms of layers. So, if you look at Adobe Camera Raw, you think top to bottom, left to right. That's how I need to edit a photo. But if you really start to dig into the weeds and start working top to bottom, left to right, it doesn't actually work out that way. And you can kind of test this by experimenting with your basic settings and hopping into your curve and make your curve like hyper red, right? Like just disgusting. And then go into the HSL, and you would think that the color mixer would then modify that red because it's below the curve, right? Well, it doesn't work that way. So I go over the way that I feel Adobe reads your raw file and reorganize your editing process to make sure that you're editing in the smartest way possible. Awesome. From top to bottom. So
that sounds really interesting, and I'm always happy to hear anyone else mention the word Bridge or the app Bridge, because I've always been a fan of Bridge and Camera Raw, and I stick my nose into Lightroom here and there, but I think there are more photographers out there than some people admit that find Bridge and Camera Raw is the way for them to work. And as you said before, even if you are a Lightroom user, there will be aspects of your classes that will be applicable to them, right?
Right. And like for anybody who's watching this, I got a comment once on YouTube that said, "Why are you showing Bridge? Aren't you a professional photographer?" I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? So if anyone's like sticking their nose up at Bridge right now, you can go home. I'm just kidding. But the cool thing is that, just like Bridge and Adobe Camera Raw, that was kind of the basis of what Lightroom was built off of. So it just seems natural to use it that way for me. And that's how I kind of used it from the beginning. I couldn't get into Lightroom. It just, I don't like things micromanaging my stuff, and that's what I felt like Lightroom did. So
well, and I think the bottom line too is for someone to say, if you're a professional, you should be using this. No, if you're a professional, you should use the tools that work the best for you. So Absolutely. To be told just because Lightroom is used by lots of people doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool for you. And I have met many people who have gone down the Lightroom path and just been frustrated because they don't, and perhaps it's because they didn't get some proper training to begin with, but just the way that it operates may or may not be ideal for everyone. So, but the bottom line is obviously you want to create a workflow that works well for you. And if it's, can make it smarter, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So it won't necessarily be like a beginning to end workflow type thing. It's more like little things that you can do that are going to make your workflow more efficient. And when you know the background behind this stuff, which is the really kind of ultra nerdy stuff, but when you know the background behind this stuff, it makes it so much better for your workflow in the end. I think the products that I'm producing now, because of these little tiny little things that I know that are happening in the background, are just making better work in the end. So
nice. Awesome. Yeah. Well, so far, I think I've said this in every instructor chat, but I'm really looking forward to watching your classes. I don't know when I'm going to have time to watch them all, but I guess that's one advantage, a little sales pitch for the VIP pass. That's one of the advantages of the VIP pass that we talked about before, is the ability to go back and rewatch classes like Blake's as often as you want, so you can get all this great information. So thanks very much for taking the time to chat. It was very enlightening to hear what your classes are all about.
Sure thing. Yeah, and I threw in some goodies there for the VIP people. So
Awesome.
there's another pitch for you. Some
Excellent.
presets and some ideas to think about. So
Perfect. All right, sir. Thank you so much.
yep. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me again.